Well, good morning. It's still morning, right? Yeah, good morning and welcome here if you're joining me in the auditorium, and if you're joining us online as well, welcome. I'm Christian Fisher. I'm President and CEO of Georgia Pacific, for those that don't know me. You recall that we started these series of conversations back in the beginning of 2018. And the reason we started these conversations is because we were aware that, there's plenty of topics out there, heavy, complicated, complex topics that many of you care about profoundly, and that you can't just leave them at home and check them out when you come to work and then kind of check back in when you leave this place. So these things matter to you, and therefore they matter to us. And that's why we said, let's talk about them. Talking about them is, of course, different from just solving all the problems, addressing all the issues, but it is a start. And where it really starts is that a lot of these topics actually have a stigma attached to it that people don't want to talk about that, don't want to get the other point of view on it, don't want to actually kind of listen, right, to do something better with that. And starting conversations intend to do exactly that. And ultimately, the purpose was always to hopefully leave you better informed, hopefully broaden all of our horizons, and hopefully enable you and excite you to want to take some positive actions that make this actually a better world through anything that you choose to do. That is really why we started this conversation. So what topics did we have in no particular order? And I may be forgetting one or the other, but we talked about race, we talked about gender, we talked in particular about challenges women had in the workplace, had or continue having in the workplace. We talked about criminal justice reform, we talked about opioids, we talked about human and sexual trafficking. Again, I may have forgotten one. But today we're here to talk about unconscious bias. It's not too easy to talk about something that's actually not conscious, right? By definition, unconscious bias. Been around forever, everybody has them. They probably serve their purpose or have at some point of time. But they greatly influence us, particularly in how we think about ourselves, how we think about the group that we feel we belong to, but also about individuals and other groups that look differently from us, on whatever basis this may be. It may be gender, it may be religion, it may be the color of your skin, it may be the accent, whatever you have. And they influence our behavior in many ways. Again, many are unconscious by definition, right? It could be the car we buy, it could be who we hang out with, it could be who we avoid, right? And so on and so forth. So again, been around forever, they are around, and we all have them. So why do you care? Well, we do believe that these unconscious biases to some extent or other, actually to a large extent, probably impact the kind of discourse or lack thereof that we see in society today. Whether that's in some public, call it dispute, conversations, discussion, whether that's in the social media space, or maybe it's even on a one-on-one basis. It really, there's plenty of actually not wanting to understand the other's point of view around. There's plenty of hostility around. Those things don't work well in our books. We are in favor of what? Humility, respect for the others, seeking to try to understand and include others' points of views. It makes us better. It makes them better. I think it makes our work better. It makes our society better. So that's what we're here to talk about today, right? And I'm going to get plenty of help from guests here today, and we'll introduce them one at a time here. But let's get started with one guest that we have here. And that goes back to an event that several of our senior leaders attended to about a year ago. And at that time, they actually listened to, at the time, Lucy Lukowicz, who is here with us. And Lucy, if you want to, you can already wander up here and join me. And so at the time, I think you were a senior in high school, right?
Yes.
And today, you are a freshman?
In college, yes. Tomorrow, starting tomorrow.
Starting tomorrow?
Yeah.
And I know you're only starting tomorrow, but you're majoring in?
Graphic design.
Okay, graphic design. All right, so anyway, so these folks listened to a poem authored by Lucy. And it must be a good poem because your mom is here today too, and she wouldn't show up if she didn't think it was a good poem, right, Margot? Okay, so anyway, the pressure's on. I was very taken aback by the poem you wrote. I read it last night. I'll give you a couple of comments after you're done, but the show is yours, Lucy.
Thank you. Can I sit again? I remember when I was 13 years old, and I remember hearing about Eric Garner on the news. Police chokehold killed New York man, it said. They didn't really mention right away that he was an unarmed black man. I remember watching the video of it online. He kept saying, "I can't breathe." I remember crying. Going upstairs into my bedroom with pink walls and sitting on my flowery bed and crying. I cried so hard. I cried so hard in my pretty bedroom, on my nice bed, in my white skin. I remember when I was 15 years old, and I remember coming to school on November 9th, 2016. I was so tired because I stayed up all night hoping he wouldn't win. I remember coming to school with messy hair and bags under my eyes, and kids were shouting MAGA at me because they knew I was upset. I remember crying. I cried so hard. I cried so hard in my private Catholic school with my computer in my backpack, in my white skin. I remember when I was 16 years old. I remember watching the news about a neo-Nazi protest in Charlottesville, Virginia. I didn't really realize that people who thought like that had such a huge following. I remember hearing our president blame both sides. I heard a kid at school ask why people were slamming white supremacists. I remember crying. I cried so hard. I was a wealthy white girl who went to a private school, but I was crying. I was crying. And now I feel like crying again. But I'm safe. I'm safe from prejudice, discrimination, racial profiling, white supremacists, the current administration, white feminism, making 63 cents for every dollar a white man makes, not having enough representation in the media, not having enough representation in the shades of concealer I want, racism, and the list goes on. But I cried so hard. And I look around at all of the strong people of color I've met in my life, and they are all standing tall and strong despite what they've been through. And here I am, small, weak, and breaking in my white skin.
Lucy, this is serious. When I was your age or approximately there, I actually tried to write poems. Well, I'm writing emails today. I know it takes a lot of skill to do what you did there, but it even more takes a bunch of guts to kind of publicize it and to do this and share this with the people in this auditorium live. So thank you very much for that. I actually, sitting in my white skin at my desk at home last night reading it, I felt like you had softly whacked me with a 2x4 over the head by the time I got to the end. So very impressive. Thank you very much for sharing that for us. And now I would like to introduce our next keynote speakers, and allow me to check on my notes on a couple of things so I don't butcher the bio here, right? We got Fanshen Cox here, and Fanshen, if you want to join me up here already. So Fanshen, you're the head of strategic outreach at, and here's the name, Pearl Street Films. Who knows Pearl Street Films? Nobody.
That's okay. That's okay.
But I guess they know Matt Damon, and I guess they know Ben Affleck.
I believe they
Anybody
do. Yes.
knows them around here?
Yes.
Okay.
Batman, Jason Bourne. Yes. Okay.
They're the owners here, and what you do there is you actually work on specific steps, right, to work towards inclusive representation in the entertainment industry, if I got that right,
That's
right?
correct, yes.
For a couple of guys that you might have heard about, right? So she too is the type of stuff that I aspired to be when I was much younger, playwright, actor, producer, educator, and she's got her own one-woman show that she takes around planet here, right?
That's right.
And we're really happy to have you here, and I know
Thank
you're
you
going to
so
take
much.
it forward from here. Thank you very much,
Thank you so
Fanshen.
much. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Thank you, Kimberly, for this lovely, warm welcome. Thank you so much, Lucy, for that incredible poem. And thank you to, we'll have some speakers later who are going to share their stories, and that's so beautiful. So thank you for being here. Who's heard the word Fanshen before, this first name? Just raise your, no, really, no, okay, you don't count. You met me before. It's an odd name, right? It's definitely unusual. And I like to tell the story. I like to start off by telling the story of my name, but I'm actually not the best person to do that. The best people to do that are my parents, my family members, to tell you a little bit. So I didn't tell you this beforehand. I didn't ask for permission, but I've brought 3 guests with me to share that story. I hope it's okay. So you're going to be meeting my Jamaican grandmother and my white mother and my Pan-Africanist Jamaican father. Granddaughter, me only granddaughter, come sit down here like you used to when you was a little girl and make me braid on no hair. Shh, that's right, okay, yes. Now, before me begin, me remember you was real tender-headed. Some people get that one, all right. I know who. But for me to continue braiding uno hair, uno have to be strong. Can you be strong? All right, now, here's the first thing we want you to do. Me want you to call your mommy and your daddy and ask them for me. What in God's name is a Fanshen? Me never could say that name. It's why me just call you my granddaughter. Why them give you that name? Oh, well, hello, everybody. Oh, my goodness, you're adorable. Hi, nice to meet you. And Lucy, my goodness, I loved that poem. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm Mama Trudy. Hi, everybody. Okay, now, yes, well, I do want to tell you about her name, but actually I do have to interrupt her for just one before I tell you. Fanshen, honey. Well, okay, now, I heard you tell all these people that I am white, and I have something to say about that. Okay, so hello now. Now, hi, Georgia Pacific. Now, I am Blackfeet Indian and Cherokee and Danish. Oh, no, I know. No, I know you're laughing because I know you took one look at me and you decided that I was white, but I sure as hell don't feel white. I do not. Oh, and Fanshen, honey, now don't forget, your father and I, we made you on purpose. We did. Oh, okay, now your name. Okay, now, let's see. Now, your father and I, now, we met at the University of Oregon. Now, he was getting his PhD and I was his TA for American politics. And it was the late 60s and we were reading lots of revolutionary stuff. Doing analysis on Marxism and Mao, you know. Oh, and we used to go to these meetings. And one time we won a trip. We won a trip to Alabama to visit a family of Black Panthers. We did. No, it was a drawing out of a hat in one of my most leftist groups. The one where we used to do embroidery for the Viet Cong that were there, yes. Now let's see, I had just gotten out of jail. What? Well, they arrested me for protesting some Bolivian dictator statue, and I'm in jail. And I tell them, I say, you know what? You better let me out because I got to go breastfeed my baby, or you're going to see milk all over the place. And then they just let me right out. They did. So anyway, Fanshen, now your name. Okay, your father and I are reading the book Fanshen together, and we are really close. The closest we ever were. Okay, now. You see, back in those times, I was very interested in the socialist revolution. especially in the form of a village program. I wanted to find a place to raise you kids to be competent and self-respecting and also socially conscious citizens, a place where racial and class oppression was absent, you see. So then I do some research on how different countries go about doing that, and then I saw that book, Fanshen, it's all about China. I saw it in the bookstore in Eugene, and well, we were so taken up with it that we decided to name you after it. Oh, wait, now you have to read the beginning of the book. Okay, so now listen, every revolution creates new words. The Chinese Revolution created a whole new vocabulary. A most important word in this vocabulary was Fanshen. Now, literally, it means to turn the body or to turn over, see? But to China's hundreds of millions of landless and land-poor peasants, it meant to stand up, to throw off the landlord yoke, to abolish word blindness and learn to read, to establish equality between the sexes. And yes, this current president has some trouble with some of these ideas, like you said, Lucy. But it meant much more than this. It meant to enter a new world. And so we say we are going to name our next baby Fanshen. Thank you. Thank you so much. So that is how this Danish, Jamaican, black, Pan-Africanist woman ended up with this revolutionary name. And we're all gonna kind of try to enter a new world together today. So we're gonna ask you actually to share some of your stories, maybe some of your vulnerabilities, and kind of try and get comfortable with one another. So we're gonna ask you some questions, we're gonna do some interaction. So everybody's got their phone. Usually when I'm speaking, I'm like, turn your phones off, but you're actually gonna use them today. And we're going to start off by talking about implicit bias or unconscious bias. And so just before we begin, so that everybody's on the same page, I chose to use this definition so we're kind of all in the same place. It's the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Okay, everybody on that page? And so now as we start to share together, I want you to always think about that is what we're talking about, something that is unconscious, it's implicit. And so we're going to ask you to go to www.slido.com, and the code you'll put in is hashtag GP. That is not a Twitter hashtag. I was like, oh, can we go on social and get the Twitter hashtag? No. Hashtag GP820. Good. Everybody there? Yeah? Was it easy? Easy to get to? Need a couple minutes? We can interact. This is interactive. Hey, everybody, are you there? You got it? It's all good, yeah. All right, so I'm going to ask you a question, and then you'll have a set of responses to choose from, okay? So the first question is, when you think about our common humanity, such as the experience and feelings we all share, what is just one word that comes to mind? Go ahead and put your answers in. We've got loneliness. We've got respect, joy, grief, melting pot, uncommon, compassion, diverse, egoism, individualism, safety, peace, division, separate, struggle, and that one in the middle. I love that one. Love. Great. Okay, we're going to go to the next question. Now that we've heard some of the many things that we have in common, especially that loved one, specifically, what has kept you from establishing meaningful connections with people who are different than you? So we've got uncertainty, looks like it is that top point. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, how to kind of work towards feeling more certain and more comfortable. Okay, uncertainty and not knowing how to approach a person. Those are both really, really similar. And then fear is connected to both of those. Okay, let's move to the next question. Have you ever had a time when you felt challenged or stood up to what you believed was a false narrative about yourself or your identity groups based on implicit bias? Oh, wow. That was fast. Yeah, okay. All right, and the no's are starting to grow a little bit. Well, it looks like the majority of us have had those uncomfortable situations. And so we're going to talk about what can you do about that? What can those of us, the 8% of us here that have not had that happen to us, that experience, and also for the 92%, how do we support those folks? And also, what can the 92% do in changing that? Okay, next question. Related. For those of us that answered yes, and so many of us, 92%, how did that make you feel, or how did it affect others? Frustrated were those first two, angry, annoyed, on the defensive, alone, generalization, overlooked, unimportant, unfair, marginalized. J. Somebody felt J. Okay. You didn't get to type it in. I didn't mean to marginalize you by calling that out. Powerful, angry, different, like they were misunderstood, disrespected, confrontational, pissed. There you go. Yeah, we can get real with this. Frustrated, false. Yeah. So 92% of us are walking around feeling this way a lot, right? Depending on our different identities, we are facing this. What have we got? Someone's laughing at something, tired.com. I was looking for tired AF. I thought that might get up there too. Good. All right. Yeah, thank you for sharing some of that with us. Undervalued. Yep. So it's something to think about that everybody is, so many of us, 92% of us are walking around with these feelings, right? And then for those 8%, what would it be like to step in your shoes? And what if we could change that number, right? What if we could change those numbers? So some things to really know about implicit bias, unconscious bias, is that it is pervasive. Every single one of us, everyone in this room, everyone in the world holds them. And they don't necessarily align with our declared beliefs. That's the whole point of it being unconscious, right? And implicit is that we may say we believe in one thing, but the way we think, our immediate responses are a whole different thing. Has anybody ever heard of the Harvard implicit bias test? Have you heard of it? Oh, it's excellent. Go on there tonight. You will see how racist you actually are. And sexist and everything. It's one of those tests where you think, I can beat this, I'm good, and you're not so good. Not any one of us. It's the Harvard implicit bias test. You can look it up tonight. Also, implicit bias, we generally tend to hold biases that our own group is the best, of course, right? We favor our own in-group. However, that also can work against us, right? We've got things like internalized racism and sexism. But here's the best news. This is the most important thing to know about implicit bias and unconscious bias is that it is malleable, it changes, it's forever changing. So this is not something that you're born with and you can never change. You absolutely can change it. So I'm going to talk about some ways that I started to learn to try to change my implicit biases. And then we'll also have time in the Q&A. We've got some stories from your colleagues. And as we start to hear those stories and think about my ways of doing it, I hope that you'll all leave here feeling like you've got some tools you can use to combat that implicit bias. But again, just always remember, our brains are changing. We're always evolving. We're complex. We can change these. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit more about my story. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I was born in a city called Cambridge, Massachusetts. Anybody ever hear about Cambridge? Oh, you have? Okay, multi-culti heaven, I call it. Yeah, growing up in Cambridge is a very progressive city. We've got Harvard, we've got MIT, but very socioeconomically diverse, especially at that time in the kind of late 70s and 80s that I lived there, and we thought of ourselves as progressive, right? I went to schools with kids named Freedom and Sunshine and Omawale, right? And so we were like, yeah, and they had 2 moms or 2 dads, and everybody was cool with it. It was no problem. In fact, I told everyone in Cambridge, when I lived in DC, my mom, she used to make me wear a yellow rain jacket with Nixon Burns baby scrawled on in permanent ink. In Cambridge, everybody just said, right on, sister. So this is Cambridge, right? And we really believed in community. And I did theater growing up in Cambridge. And so I, always decided I was going to be an actor from a young age. And so this is a play that we did in high school. We always got to write our own plays. And in our plays, everybody got to be anything, right? Anybody, didn't matter what you looked like, how tall or short, if you were black, white, Japanese, you could play any role. It was colorblind casting at the time. And then I don't know if you recognize anybody recognize anyone in that picture besides me? I'm there. Anybody else? Look at little punk Matt Damon there in the background. Yep, I was the lead. Look at him. So yeah, I grew up with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. We were really, really close growing up because we did theater together all the time. So we were kind of, you spent a lot of time together. And it was great because in Cambridge, they made us all believe that we could become anything we wanted to be. And then when Matt and Ben made it, we were like, yes, it's coming true, it's coming true. And then, of course, when I got older and started to see who made it and who didn't make it, I started to see that there were some things about their identities that helped push them, some forces about their identities as white, cisgendered boys and then men that helped push them in a direction where they could eventually do all the things they did. They're also talented and smart. But there was a reason that they made it, and the other guy who was an amazing actor in our school, but he was a darker-skinned black man, is now teaching community college, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he wanted to be an actor, and he didn't have the same opportunities. And then a little bit later, I tried acting. I moved out to LA, and I was like, I'm gonna be Hollywood, I'm gonna do this. And I constantly got this feedback from casting directors, well, are you white or are you black? Because then we just need to know. And then I'd have to decide, well, how am I gonna dress in the audition? And do I straighten my hair or where? Isn't that ironic? If I straighten my hair, they'll think I'm black, and if I leave it curly, they may think I'm Jewish. I don't know, right? So I'm constantly well, how do I approach this? And so eventually I got tired of this constant rejection and not being enough of this or enough of that or too much of this or that. And so I ended up writing my own one-woman show called One Drop of Love. One Drop of Love examines the construction of race in the United States. I use the racial categories on the US Census as the historical backdrop. So in the very first scene, I tell everyone it's now 1790. It's the very first US Census. And I go around and I tell everyone in the audience which of the racial categories available at the time that they fit into. Do you know how many categories were available at that time? How many racial categories? 2. Yeah, 2. Oh, yes. Free white male, free white female, right? White, and slave. So that's kind of fun. I never recommend anyone go around calling people slaves at the beginning of a show. But I make the point that this is uncomfortable on purpose, right? Because talking about race and racism is uncomfortable. And I use that historical context to connect with my personal story, my story about my parents and my family, and the ways that this construct of race, this systemic concept of race, is affecting our personal relationships. It's getting in the way. So I go around the country, I'm doing my show, and then I end up working with Matt and Ben at their production company called Pearl Street Films. And my whole goal in my job is, now I've learned to tell my story, and it's such an incredible gift I've given myself. What could happen if I help other people tell their stories? What if I teach people how to write a screenplay, tell their story on TV, or in film, or in streaming content? And so that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. In my first year there, I co-created with these awesome women here, Kalpana Kodagal, who's a civil rights attorney, and Dr. Stacy Smith, who's a data analyst at USC, and they look at entertainment data, representation. Who do we get to see in cast and crew, in executive suites, and who don't we get to see? And we got together and we created a clause for contracts, and it's called the inclusion rider. And so the inclusion rider is this addendum that actors like Matt and Ben can take into their negotiations for their contracts with a studio and say, we think it's important for you to hire people that look like what the rest of the country looks like, or that look like where this story is taking place. We want you to hire those folks. So it should be about 50-50 women in most cases, as an example. I always said, if it's the David Duke story, then that's good. Y'all can keep, But for the most part, we want to make sure cast and crew actually represents what the world looks like. And then a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, at the Oscars, Frances McDormand stands up and accepts her Oscar award, and then she says, I've got 2 words for you, inclusion rider, and then our worlds blew up, and it was amazing. So we're still working towards making sure that this is one way that casting directors and producers, the people that are doing the hiring, we're combating their implicit biases. Because what we're saying to them is, before you make the decision, remember you've got some implicit biases in your head. You're working already with unconscious bias. So use this to help you reflect on that before you decide who to hire. And so my experiences growing up in Cambridge, my experiences doing my show, One Drop of Love, and then my experiences working with Matt and Ben all led me to this mantra that I have, this affirmation that I use all the time, because I think this is one of the keys for all of us, and that is truth, justice, and love. Truth, justice, and love. And I'm going to ask you all to say that with me, please. Truth, justice, and love. Yeah, I think if we approach our storytelling and our lives and how we treat other people with truth, justice, and love, that we can combat implicit bias. At least it's one tool that we can use. So I'm going to break each of these down for you and talk about, what do I mean by these? Because a lot of times I say truth and people are like, well, what do you mean by truth? Who's truth? I know, they're so rude, right? And so one of my answers is historical truth as an example, and the non-dominant narratives. So I was born in 1970, and I grew up being told that Christopher Columbus was a hero, right? 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? And that he was so important and that he discovered, literally when I was growing up, even in progressive Cambridge, we celebrated Columbus Day and we said he discovered America. And then, of course, as I grew up, we started to realize there were other people here. There were people here. There were lots of people here doing lots of wonder and actually taking care of our planet and taking care of one another. And so I started to think, what about that story? What about that non-dominant narrative as something that's really important to know? That's what I mean when I say truth. And another part of truth is systems. So we can tell our personal stories, and our personal stories are so important for empathy and getting to know ourselves and other people. But also we need to understand the story of systems. That's why I include the census in my show, because it's not just about my feelings about race and racism or my father's or my mother's. It's also there is a legal system in place that determines what we're called, what race we are. It determines why when those casting directors looked at me, they had to ask black or white. It determines how my father was treated when he immigrated to this country. Those systems are just as important to understand as our own personal stories. I love this quote by James Baldwin, and it's actually, I'm proud to say it's in the foreword of a new edition of the book I'm named after, Fanshen. So he says, history is not merely something to be read. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously, again, there's that word, unconsciously controlled by it in many ways. And history is literally present in all that we do. And so not one of us can say we identify this way or that way without understanding what is the historical context behind that. So one of the truths that I find that is this kind of non-dominant narrative. It's funny because in some ways people say, oh, we know white history, but we don't know the invention of whiteness. Raise your hand if you know how white people became white. Oh, put your hand down. You don't know. Come on. No, you probably do. Okay, but I'm going to tell it anyway. One person, right? How did white people become white? Well, that's an important part of history because nobody was born white. Right? It's a construct. We know that. We all agree with that. The Human Genome Project said definitively, and nobody's been able to disprove it, there really isn't such a thing as white. So how did this happen? How did this invention happen in the first place? Well, to go back in history, you can find moments where people started using this word. But one of the most important examples, I think, is the Supreme Court decision of Ozawa and Thind in the 1920s. So in the 1920s, a Japanese man named Takao Ozawa, he had lived here for 20 years, raised his children as Christian, dressed as other Americans dressed at the time, spoke only English, only allowed his children and his wife to speak English. He wanted to become an American citizen. But the problem was, at that time, in the 1920s, the only way you could be a citizen of this country was to be white. So you had to prove that you were white in order to become a citizen. So he gathers up, he does all of this research, he works with his attorney, and they take it all the way to the Supreme Court to prove that he is white. And the Supreme Court is like, we don't think so. And he says, but I raised my kids this way. I'm more important than, I care more about America than lots of other Americans. I'm whiter than a lot of Americans I know. I am white. He even says, I don't even go out in the sun. He does, I'm sad to say. So the Supreme Court looks over his case and they listen and then they say, well, no, we're sorry, but all of the science right now says that in order to be white, you have to be Caucasian. And you are not from that region, and therefore you are not white. So no, you cannot become a citizen. 3 months later, and during Ozawa's trial, this man named Bhagat Singh Thind, who's South Asian, he's watching this trial very carefully because he's like, I got this. Yes, I am Caucasian. I'm part of that region. Done, right? So he takes his case to the Supreme Court. By the way, he's a veteran. He, fought for this country, takes his case all the way to the Supreme Court. They lay it out. He's also wealthy, right? He's like, I've got everything I need to be white. I'm white. Give me my citizenship. Thank you so much. And the Supreme Court says, no, we're sorry, but it may be true that the blonde Scandinavian and the brown Hindu have a common ancestor in the dim reaches of antiquity, but the average man knows perfectly well that there are unmistakable and profound differences between them today. So in Ozawa's case, 3 months prior, they said, scientific authorities say you are not white. In Thinn's case, 3 months later, they literally say this in the court decision: science really is not relevant here. It's not correct. It doesn't matter. The common man knows that you are not white. And this is what we all believe about ourselves. This is what we believe about white people and whiteness. So we have got to dig in and tell the truth about whiteness and understand what are the origins. This is what this leads to, this understanding that racism birthed race, not the other way around. There is no such thing, really, as white or black. We've created them. We now believe in them. And they have dire consequences in terms of the resources that we have, in terms of wealth, in terms of health care, in terms of housing. But we're basing all of that on a lie. Racism birthed race, not the other way around. Another truth that we need to talk about is intersectionality. Raise your hand if you know intersectionality is starting to become, okay, good, yeah, all right, let's do some black folks, some women, okay, that makes sense. All the white folks, y'all should know too. It's important, maybe LGBTQ folks. It's important, okay? So intersectionality talks about our various identities and the ways that those identities either leave us more oppressed or less oppressed, with more privilege. It's coined by this amazing woman, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. And she says, for example, because of their intersectional identity as both women and people of color, the interests and experiences of women of color are frequently marginalized within both, right? So if you're looking at women's rights, Black women, Latinx women tend to have to be marginalized to white women, right? If you're looking at the rights of people of color, which that alone is such a horrible term, right? Like, what are white people, transparent? I'm like, isn't that a color? Is white? We learned in kindergarten, white's a color, right? Right? That's another way to marginalize, right? Is that you're non-white. This is white, the norm, and you are not that, right? So this is intersectionality, and Dr. Crenshaw's amazing. She's got a great TED Talk. Just go tonight after you do before you do implicit bias, do Kimberly Crenshaw, that you might do better on the implicit bias test. Yeah, she's wonderful. She's an amazing person. And so that includes LGBTQ, right? That includes class. All of these intersecting identities mean that in some cases within that identity, you are marginalized within the group we've put you into. And it's important to think about that. So I want to give you another example from my parents. So I told you that I call my mom white. She does not call herself white. She's like white. She calls herself Blackfeet Indian and Cherokee and Danish. But as I'm creating my show, she shares this important story with me, and it started to get me thinking about intersectionality and what white really means. Fanshen, oh honey, what? You want to hear about my dad? Okay, okay, you're right. No, I mean my dad's. Oh, Fanshen, honey, now you know all about my daddy. Well, that is her grandpa Grant. Well, he was a logger, and we lived in Elgin. Do you know where Elgin, have you heard of Elgin? You know it? You do know. It's a little forestry logging town in Oregon. And I just loved him. But my mom left him. She left him, and she took up with Leighton Hamilton. Oh, but that's okay. That's okay. She divorced him after he threatened to kill us with a rifle. But, well, yes, and then she married him again. Okay, so now that's my daddy. That's your grandpa Grant. And then it's Leighton Hamilton twice. And then it was Gentry, the pedophile. Oh, but then it was Swales. Oh, I loved him. Oh, and then Adams and Mitchell. Also twice. What? How did I survive? Well, I just hid all the time. I hid all the time. You see, now when I was a little baby, a little toddler, I hid in chicken boxes in the barn. See, I would go around and I'd find the smallest space I could get myself into, and I would just stay there. And I would hide. I would just hide in chicken boxes all the time. Thank you. And so this is why my mother has a hard time identifying as white, because she's like, oh my God, my life was so hard growing up. What about, right? What about all these dads and growing up in poverty and having to hide in chicken boxes? And that's something to listen to and something to consider. She still has white privilege. If her skin were different and she grew up in those conditions, she would have racism added on to all of those things. But it's still so important to understand that history, that hard truth about her story, to understand who she is as a full human being and start to see our common humanity. And here's, oh, did I push that all into my pocket? Okay. So, and here's my dad. My dad's experience coming to undergrad for the first time. Again, he immigrated from Jamaica in the 50s. Oh, stop. Here, Megan, take this, and I'm going to, okay. Sorry. Live talk. La-la. Okay. Well, now it's 1958, and it's my very first week at California Polytechnic State College, and well, I'll never forget that I'm on the bus on the way to school, and this white lady comes and she sits down next to me. And I tell you, I am so afraid of this white lady sitting next to me on the bus. You see, my friends back in Jamaica had warned me, you will get lynched for talking to a white lady, and I had read that. I'd seen that in the movies too. So this lady tried to talk to me, but I couldn't. I wouldn't say a word. Now, when I get to the campus, I see how things really are going to be. There aren't any other black students. I'm completely surrounded by whites 24 hours a day. I feel very self-conscious about my accent, and I lose it as quickly as possible. I just put my head down and I go to class. You see, back in Jamaica, I was aware of being a lower class person. But I had never felt shackled, you see. But here, now, in the US, suddenly I was in a position of permanent inferiority. I had become a racial being. Thank you. Thank you. So hearing both of my parents' stories and then adding that context of the system, right, of the US Census and what happened to my dad from being in Jamaica, where he was a proud Jamaican and that's how he identified, and then coming to this country and immediately being told and also embracing blackness, what does that mean for the ways that we think about one another and we think about race? And that leads us to justice, right? Truth, justice. And I put them in that order on purpose, right? We have to start by telling the truth, the non-dominant narrative, those truths that are really hard and heartbreaking, or even pushing ourselves to tell the unconscious bias truth, really starting to see them and acknowledge them. But once we do that, we have some clarity so that we can pursue justice. And what does that look like? Always think about what is the history or the story that you haven't told, or the ones that you haven't heard. Search them, search for them, find them, seek them out. Those are the important stories we need to tell. As I learned from the inclusion writer, demographics and data are important. They help tell us where the disparities are. So saying something like, I don't see color, isn't helpful. First of all, because we love our color. But second of all, because seeing color allows you to see the disparities, at least around race, sometimes around gender. That data, those demographics are important. We have to use them for the right things. We've been taking the census since 1790. People tell us it's to decide where the resources should go. Seems like still every single time the resources aren't quite reaching the right people, right? The people who need them. So use those demographics and data and then work to correct them. Where are the disparities? Where is the lack of justice there? And correct them. And tell stories and tell history, but not just of individuals, but also of systems. There's a great, amazing, have you all heard of the 1619 Project? The New York Magazine is doing, okay, grab this. So y'all got some homework. Intersectionality, TED Talk by Kimberly Crenshaw, implicit bias test, and the 1619 Project. It is now exactly 400 years since June, since the first ship carrying enslaved peoples were brought to the Americas, to Virginia. The 1619 Project. Look it up. I believe this one is free, so there's no paywall if you find it online, the 1619 Project. You will learn about the systems in place that still are in place. That's justice. Truth, justice, love. Will you say that with me? Truth, justice, love. And here's the beautiful thing. When you tell the truth, and then you pursue justice based on that truth, that's what love looks like. So hugs are nice, that's fine. You can give me a hug, right? You can hug each other, you can say I love you, you can do all of those things. But in reality, love is active. Love is taking action. Love is telling the truth. Love is seeking justice all the time. Love is truth plus justice in action. Truth first, then justice, then love. Say it with me, please. Truth, justice, love. Yes. So we have some incredibly brave and wonderful, Bruce, like, oh boy. Some of your colleagues are here to share some of their truths and share their experiences with unconscious bias right here at work and in their lives. And we're so grateful to all of you for being brave and sharing your story. And hopefully this is going to encourage you to share more of yours. So we have Bruce and Joy and Lena. Come on up. Bruce, would you like to go first? Are you comfortable?
That's what I've been told, so that's what I'm going to do.
Good.
So, hi y'all. I'm Bruce, and so upon first meeting me, at least until I open my mouth anyways, most people assume that I am male, which is correct. But however, once I open my mouth, like I just did because I'm Southern and there's nothing I can do about that, people assume two things. One, they assume I'm a very effeminate gay man. Okay, cool. Two, they assume I am a butch lesbian named Ruth. You would not believe the number of times I've been called Ruth. But that tends to be when I'm less beardy. But so at the moment, I am beardy. It's very nice. So people just assume I'm a gay man and then leave it at that and go on with their business. However, when I open my mouth, something trips in their heads. I go from being a very effeminate gay man with a high-pitched voice to being a girl, which, okay. Sure. When in reality, I am a transgender man. So I spent the first 20 years of my life living as a woman. And then I've now been living my truth for 9 years? Yeah, 9 years, something like that. And then there's just something about those first 20 years of my life. They color the way I act, the way I speak, the way I react to people around me, the way I'm much more comfortable being around women than I am being around men. And that confuses people. Because now I've said I am transgender, born a girl, am a man. For a lot of people, that trips something even more than just me speaking and saying hi and being generally queer. That trips them changing small things. And I don't think they're doing it consciously. Most of it is very subconscious. I went from, since I present as male, albeit a gay male, from being he, him, sir, man, Mr., things of that nature, to being she, ma'am, Ruth. And that's a very interesting concept to think about when you think about gender, and being that gender is not like most people think of as male or female, or as a spectrum between male and female and then everything else there in the middle. When reality, it's a galaxy. I could take a handful of the brightest colored glitter that the cleaners would get very angry with me for, and just throw it up in the air, and then that is gender. It's all those multicolored little specks of light that result from a very hard to clean up mess. And my saying all of this, coming out to way more of you people than I care to count, has opened myself up to everything that I just said. As most of you probably very much thought I was just a very effeminate gay man, and now some of you, it might trip in your head that, wait, he, she, and then you trip over your words. Just please don't call me Ruth. Yeah, no, that is not the name that I would have ever picked for myself. And I wanted to do this to essentially bring up the fact that gender as an unconscious bias of what you think of the people around you is, I could look at any one of you in the audience, and probably my perception of what your gender is and what your gender identity is, while I might be close, especially if you identify as a cisgender person, I could also be wildly wrong. Especially if you look at my friend group, from people who are male, female, somewhere in the middle, none of the above.
Bruce, do you mind? I use the word cisgender also, and I was going to ask, would you define cisgender, so we're all on the same page with that?
Yeah, certainly. So a cisgender individual is somebody who identifies as the gender that they were born as. So that also includes to being, if you were born and the doctor picked you up and was like, looks like a girl, cool, and you identify as a female, then that would make you cisgender. The same for a male, but that is not to say that your gender presentation is the same as another person of your sex or identified gender. Thank
you.
Yeah, so that actually brings me into my next point. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so and I've been telling you guys this, I'm considerably cuter outside of work. Less button downs, more sequins.
I want to see a picture.
I don't think I have any.
Okay.
Probably for good reason. So to tell my story is to tell the story of, well, myself, but also to begin to tell the story of everybody else who has a disparity, I think that's how you pronounce that word, between their sex and their gender, or their, what culture expects their gender to be versus what their gender actually is. And with the hopes that my bringing this up can start to spark thoughts in all of you to think that when you see a person, do you really see that person, or do you see the person as you expect to see them? And in the case of certain individuals, some folks are more welcome to questions than others. If you perceive that they're open to questions, ask. That's really the best thing that you can do if you're confused about somebody's gender, is ask in a polite, respectful manner. And yeah.
Beautiful. I just want to point out quickly that so many of us responded uncertainty was the thing that kept us from kind of talking to people about the uncomfortable things. And so Bruce has just said, ask, right? So
If you have questions.
yes, thank you so much. Joy.
I'm Joy. I'm Black, surprise. Before I introduce my experiences as a Black woman, I just want to point out the fact that my experiences are mine, and I can't speak for every Black woman at GP or every Black woman in the country. But as it presents itself with unconscious bias, with Black women, our hair tends to define who we are when people see us for some reason. But that reason being is something that Fanshen had touched on with lack of diversity in movies and TV, and essentially it's lack of diversity in corporate America as well, where you feel like you stand out like a sore thumb if you wear your natural hair. There's this pressure to conform, to wear straighter hair to present as kept or professional. And my experiences have been going to companies' websites to see, oh, do they wear braids there? Or is it okay? Or when I come to interviews, how are the Black women there? Are they natural? Do they feel comfortable with being themselves? And it's a question that we have to ask ourselves, unfortunately. Some of the unconscious bias that I've experienced at workplaces have been people touching my hair without asking, like I'm at some sort of petting zoo.
So do not do that. Do not do that.
I get it. People are naturally inquisitive. Oh, how'd you get those things in there? There's nothing wrong with asking.
That's where uncertainty draws the line.
Absolutely.
Don't touch a Black woman's
just
hair.
reach out and grab my hair and invade my personal space. I've had someone do that on an airplane with my daughter, where I could tell that she wasn't from America. She was Asian, and she didn't speak any English, and she reached out and started touching my kid's hair, and I had to be the calm one, because I knew she didn't get it, but we don't do that over here. I don't know if she got it right.
Yeah.
But, she would say, oh, can I take a picture? And sure, but you have to ask, and that's kind of the thing that I wanted to make people aware of in the workplace as well, is that it's okay to be inquisitive and ask questions, but you want to make sure that you're doing it in a way where you're not making someone feel as though they are on exhibit. So that is my experience personally as a
Lena.
Hi, yes, I'm Lena. So before I share with you all an experience I've had, I want to do a quick mind exercise. I want you all to think about what went through your head when you saw me walk on the stage, or maybe when you've seen me in the lobby before. Maybe you assumed I might have some kind of accent. Maybe you wondered whether I wear this headscarf as a part of my religion or as a fashion statement. Maybe you questioned whether it's even my choice to be wearing it. Maybe you thought I might be submissive in nature, or a little soft-spoken. Having some of these questions or assumptions or potential biases about people who are different than us isn't wrong or a problem. It's only human and natural. But it can become a problem when it impacts the way we interact with those people. Or even worse, if it impacts our decision on whether or not to even engage them. So the example I have for you is one to help dimensionalize the fact that unconscious bias doesn't really necessarily have to be negative or offensive. My son, Zane, goes to the daycare here, and just a couple weeks ago moved to a new class. And a couple weeks before the transition, his teacher called me and asked, whether he speaks a different language at home, because she's putting labels around the class and wanted to incorporate his language. And so that got me thinking, why is she even assuming that he speaks a different language? Is it because of the way I dress? Is it because of the way he looks? And as I was thinking about that, clearly her intentions were good and not at all bad. But it got me wondering, why is she even thinking about that? And so as I think about that, as people have some of these unconscious bias about me, my response to anyone who asks me a question, kind of what we were talking about earlier, is just thank you. Of course, as long as the question was actually genuine and not rude. But I want them to ask me the question and give me the chance to voice my perspective, as opposed to them walking around with this unfounded assumption in their head. So I leave you with this, as we've all been talking about, as we all encounter different people in different stages of our lives, take the time and find the courage to approach that person you might not have normally because they're a little different from you. Take the time to ask them some questions, even if it feels uncomfortable, because I really, truly believe that that's really the first step for us, all of us, to work towards making unconscious bias a conscious matter.
Thank you all so much. That's wonderful. So all of your colleagues have said, talk to us, right? And keep in mind that some people, not everyone is comfortable talking, and that's okay too. Likely it's because they've maybe spent their lives or maybe the last 10 minutes explaining something and they're just tired. I think one of the things to remember, for example, with race is, because this country has come to see white as the default for human being, that a lot of times those questions come across as othering or marginalizing. So that's something to think about, to approach it not as, well, I'm just a human. You are also a race. You are racialized, right? And the same with heterosexuality, for example, that we're just used to that being the norm, when really if we look at data and demographics, it's probably not. Gender as well, to always think the way you identify is not the default for human. You have an identity as well. And so that really helps when approaching. And then if someone says no, don't be offended by it, just accept it and move on. Thank you all so much again. Yes. Amazing. So we are opening it up to Q&A now. Should we just do that from here and we're all standing? Yes, okay, Q&A. Anybody have questions? And looks like we've got a mic for you to ask. And again, your colleagues just said ask away. It might be a good time.
For anyone who might be wondering, I am from the Middle East, because that a lot of times is a question I get. Is she from the Middle East? Is she from South Asia? Maybe some people don't even know that's different.
Thank you. Yes. Tell us where specifically. Do you want to go into more?
My family's originally from Egypt.
Thank you. Anybody also, if there's someone who might want to share your experiences with unconscious bias here at work or in your life? Anybody got revolutionary parents like mine? They're just a little. You do? Come on, we gotta hear it. Are we bringing the mic down, or we'll pick it up? Yes.
Hi.
There we go. Thanks.
Yeah, you all noticed that I'm not from America. I'm a brown. I'm from India. I moved to United States about 3 years ago when I came here to masters. I think a lot of people know that Indians just come here, either go to California or be in IT. Although I am in IT, but that's like I just wanted to share my story and just tell that unconscious bias. And I had no idea what to do. I was just going with the flow. Originally, I wanted to move to London to just see if I can get what I want or just know what I want to learn, because in India, I grew up in a very privileged background. My parents could just loan me money to whatever I wanted to pursue. And I'm like, okay, I want to go else. I want to explore options. And I ended up being in the United States, and I shared this perspective like, hey, maybe I want to pursue maybe creative career or just want to do as a hobby. And they're like, oh, you don't want a promotion? I'm like, no, why would I need a promotion? Like, oh, but you have to earn more money because you left your country and moved to another country. So that's like kind of unconscious bias. I feel that because when I went back to holiday to India this time, they're like, oh, so what do you want to do? You want to do PhD? Or I'm like, no, I don't want to do PhD. Maybe I want to do something else, or I like my work as it is, and I also want to do something creative. I'm like, oh, really? But aren't you like Indian and you're supposed to keep getting degrees? I'm like, no, last thing I want to do is get another degree, I think. Yeah, I mean, like it's when I want to pursue something else other than what, like, I think the country is filled with doctors and engineers. They're wonderful. They excel in their field, and I don't want to hurt anybody. But just it's an assumption or unconscious bias. Like you keep getting degrees, and you just go and get promotion or become CEO, become another Sundar Pichai, and this is what the expectation is. And yes. I fought so hard. Like for a week, I was in India with my parents. I'm like, no, I don't want to become any of those. And I wanted to tell them I want to do this project in photography. They're like, okay, that doesn't gonna pay you anything. I'm like, I don't want it to pay, and everything you do doesn't have to pay. And I think there are some other. I want to just share this.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect example of that in-group bias, right? It's not just to outside groups. It's what, those things where you have these expectations and stereotypes within your own group, and they can be harmful. What creative career? Are you going to become an actor? You want to do your own one-woman show? Let's talk. Good. Anybody else want to share an experience or have questions? Yes.
I'm loud.
Go ahead.
So I really don't need that. I'm gonna blow people's. Okay, cool. So I'm Emily. I've been a GP for a little over a year, and as I stand here today, you might think, how have I experienced this bias? As I stand here as a blue-eyed, brown-haired white woman that presents as a cisgendered white woman, but I am actually a lesbian, and that intersectionality can sometimes really, those implicit biases can fall within your own group. And I have experienced that a lot in my life as I present as a straight woman. You never would know if I walked down the street that is how I identify, and we have to be conscious of those things even within our own groups and to not make people feel like they're on the margins, because it can force people to feel like they're not included and they don't have a voice to be seen as, like you said, there's a spectrum in every group. There's a wide spectrum of people that can be included in that. And I am an American, and I am Southern, and I am white, and I am also a lesbian, and I'm proud to be a woman, and I'm all of those things in one person.
Yes.
So that's all.
I feel like we're going to make a lot of one-woman shows after today. Excellent, thank you. Anybody else want to share? Anybody?
Yes, please. Mic'd up. I was going to keep that towards the end, but it might fit in here, right?
Yes.
We talked about that there's techniques and tools to actually help us identify and work on some things, right? And obviously, I mean, whenever you think about these tools, you think about learning, right? And you learn about yourself, you learn about others, and you learn about techniques, how to cope with these things, if you just choose to work on these things. So a real life example, about a year ago, I serve on the board of Atlanta International School here. It's by all means and purposes what you would describe as a very diverse school, right? Like 1,350 kids or something like that. And I think we got something like, don't quote me exactly on it, like 100 different languages, representatives from 70 countries. You look around and say, wow, that's a very diverse school. So I and the board actually took one of these, what we call cultural biases training courses. And then we got a group and a personal debrief. I thought the group debrief, first of all, was very, very interesting. Obviously, it was bubbling up all the individual outputs. But essentially, here's the punchline. We as a board, as diverse a board and as a diverse an environment that we were being part of every day, right? In terms of our biases versus other school boards that have been tested, do you think we did better, worse, or about the same? Well, I gotta talk about that. We didn't do worse, but we were just average. I was surprised about that. I said, well, don't we kind of just live side by side and together all day long, etc. All these colors, accents, origins, and all that. You know, I came to a very simplistic conclusion for myself. This stuff doesn't happen by osmosis, just by being there. If it does, it doesn't really change the game. If you really want to make a difference, you got to work on it. And the next step I took, I said, okay, now give me my personal download. And that took about an hour, and it really did.
Yes.
That told me much more, but really, and that allowed me, you know, to work on a couple of things, and hopefully, you know, I'm putting good things into practice here. But that's my personal learning journey in that regard.
You just said it. You said truth, justice, love. That's exactly it. It's the work, right? It's putting in that work. That reflects back to us that you are putting in the work.
Yep.
You're telling the truth about yourself and about, a lot of times it's true, a lot of us who consider ourselves progressive or liberal, we can be the worst.
Well, there were differences between my beliefs and my,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
So that was a learning. So anyway, you know, with love, I'm gonna suggest that my direct reports take one of these assessments.
I love it. Homework.
And we'll also make some of this available, not the one I took, on the website tomorrow. So I just wanted to put that in.
So to wrap up, I just want to encourage all of you. Thank you for sharing your stories. Tell your story. There are pieces of your story that are part of the non-dominant narrative that we haven't heard, and ask other people to tell theirs. These are some great resources for you. The Op-Ed Project, trainings, fellowships, resources to amplify underrepresented voices. They do workshops across the country. Strongly recommend. NaNoWriMo, you write a novel in 1 month. Have you all heard of it? It's so amazing. Nano is National Novel Writing Month. It's the month of November, so it's coming up. Get ready and write your novels, tell your stories. And Center for Story-Based Strategy, they do movement building and analysis of narrative power. Storytelling at the center of social change. Thank you all so much. It's been wonderful to be with today. Thank you.
Guys, those of you that have to head out. That's not a problem. I'll just close in 1 minute here. So I want to thank again our presenters, Lucy, Fanshen, Bruce, Joy, Lena. Thank you very much for everything. You carried the conversation here. Thanks for the courage also to bring these things into the narrative, into the conversation. And you know, we learned a lot about this. I'm not going to repeat it all, but we spoke about differences, but we also spoke about things that we have in common and how powerful these stories are, right? And there's a moment to emphasize this and a moment to emphasize that. I would like to close here with a brief video of a real person, one of our colleagues, Vic Billingsley, who works at the cellulose mill in Leaf River, Mississippi. And I'll get off the stage, watch it. It's less than 2 minutes. I think that's a powerful takeaway. So thank you very much for everything.
Hi, my name is Cara French. I'm 12 years old and I live in Atlanta, Georgia.
Hi, I'm Vic Billingsley, 58 years old, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And we both share the same liver.
Cara French is no longer fighting for her life. After receiving a split liver transplant, Cara got the smaller portion. The larger portion of the liver went to 46-year-old father of 3, Victor Billingsley in Mississippi.
I would really love to hold that child and bring the two parts together.
We would like to meet him and just see how he's doing.
We're grateful to the donor, and you know, the donor didn't die in vain.
Hey guys, this is Cara coming at you from, where are we, Dad?
Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Yes, that place. And I get to meet my liver brother. I've never met him before. This is my first time. This is my parents' first time meeting him too. I'm really excited.
I started off as an emergency response technician at Leaf River. We deal with anything from fire, hazmat, medical, rescue. My co-workers at Leaf River, they were so willing to do anything. There were blood drives. Some people even offered, hey, I've got some vacation that you're more than welcome to have. That was one of the most amazing things. You've got to be kidding me. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. How are you, love?
It's just so surreal seeing my extended family and meeting you guys for the first time. It's really amazing.
It's probably easier for people to find differences. There's a lot of common. You have to kind of seek that out. You know, we certainly have something that is in common, and it gave life to both of us.
We're all one and under the eyes of God, and we should appreciate that we're even here.